Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, oh, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
We're back to Mr. Sir Ronald Ross now, and on his return to Indy in 1895, Ross began his quest to prove the hypothesis of a man named Alphonse Leveran, love you man. Hi, my name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? Hello, and welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? This week we are discussing the Panama Canal. Come along for the ride this week as I ask, the Panama Canal, how did that happen? All right, we are here for another episode of HDTH. Like I said, we are doing the Panama Canal this week. When I was doing my research for this episode, I did find that and I mentioned it later on, there have been a lot of podcast episodes about this actual topic. A lot of the ones that I do, you don't see, as many people doing them as I've seen. So there was a large amount of information that was already available. I try to dig a little deeper and grab some things that I didn't think most people mentioned that I thought was worth it. Let's see, is there anything else I need to mention? Let's see, what am I watching right now? Not a lot. And I was thinking about it before I even stepped on here to do the episode. And I realized, it's because this is like a great time for sports. I'm watching a lot of sports is what I'm watching. I'm not watching very much TV or as far as like scripted shows or anything like that. My weekends are pretty much college football and then the NFL a little bit. I'm not watching that much NFL, but I still watch like it's on, in the background kind of. And then I'm a big baseball fan, so the playoffs are gearing up. So yeah, that's why I realized I was like, oh, you're not really watching anything. Then I thought, I was like, well, what are you doing with your time? Then I realized I'm watching the sports, but I did start to watch a movie called I think it's Don't Worry He Won't Get Far on Foot, and it's got like Joaquin Phoenix in it, Jonah Hill, some other people. Jonah Hill, as always, he just delivers. He's just a great actor. He always just seems to get it. But I've only gotten about halfway through with it. It's a little bit of dark material. The guy ends up getting into a car accident, and he wasn't even driving, and he gets paralyzed from like the waist down or something like that, and so he has to like deal with that, and also him being an alcoholic, yada. But so it's a pretty good movie from what I'm seeing, and I do intend to finish it. I just kind of have some other stuff going on, but I believe that is it. And like I see, I do want to say. I appreciate everybody who does come back and listen every week. We are, I'm seeing those downloads continue to go. I appreciate you guys. Without further ado, here is the episode. The idea of creating a water passage across the Isthmus of Panama to link the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans dates back to at least the 1500s. And before we get even deeper than that, I'll go ahead and define for you what an isthmus is and try to keep pronouncing it as well. An isthmus is defined as a narrow strip of land with sea on either side, forming a link between two larger areas of land. Now, after explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa realized that a narrow strip of land separated the two oceans, King Charles I of Spain tapped his regional governor to survey the route. To survey a route along the river, the Chagres River. Is it I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah, it turns out it's the Chagres River. I hope I got that right. The only other route was, the only other route to get around basically like South America would be to go, to sail around South America. And that's through using the Strait of Magellan, which nobody really wanted to do. Or you could use the Panama Railroad to basically transfer your goods, which is interesting. I never really thought about it, but I guess it makes sense to the way that they explained it. It is like there's the Panama Railroad was one of the first things to kind of be in that area as far as like moving commercial production. And so what you would do is, I guess, pull your ship up to like the mountain range that was keeping people from taking their ships through, and you would put your goods on a train that would then either take it through wherever you wanted to go, or I guess you could then have someone meet you with another ship on that other side. I don't know, but they were basically, that's not what they said, but they said you basically could bring it up and the goods would get transferred onto the train and then I guess take them wherever they had to go on land. And so let's see. So there are two types of canals, and I thought this was important to mention before we get a lot deeper, because at first when I read this, I was just gonna try to gloss over it. I thought it didn't matter, but the reality of it is that this is actually pretty important, and this is the type of canal that they choose to build is what actually the land dictates that, I guess, if you will. So there are two types of canals, as I said. There's a sea level canal, which is one through which vessels may pass without obstruction of any kind, and that's the one that you see. I wouldn't say you see the most, but it's the one that probably comes to mind the most. It's literally you just digging your way through a place, and then putting some water there or whatever, and then the boats just kind of ride through as if it was already there. The lock canal is a little different in that it's an enclosure or basin located in the course of a canal or a river, or in the vicinity of a dock, with gates at each end, within which the water within which the water level may be varied to raise or lower the boats. And that's actually how the Panama Canal works. And had you have asked me this before, I would have had no idea. I thought it was just, I believe it's the Suez Canal is built that way. It's just a sea level canal. They just made a way, and there's some water in there, which is, and I don't get into it in this podcast because what I've realized is there are so many Panama Canal podcasts out there. We're not like ones based on them, but a lot of people have done episodes on the Panama Canal, even to some surprising people. But so they mention a lot of different things, but they're well, I don't know. I guess I'll just say the people who built the Suez Canal thought that because they built the Suez Canal, that the Panama Canal was going to be a walk in the park, and it turned out to be a walk in the jungle with malaria and yellow fever. But we get to that, just not the Suez Canal part. So the French were the first to make an attempt in modern times to try to do a canal, and then there were two locations that they were deciding upon before they did it. So believe it or not, could have possibly been a canal in Nicaragua, but it never really got off the ground, never got out of the planning stages. But they went ahead and chose the Panama Canal, chose to do the canal in Panama. Some say partly because the Panama Railroad was already there. There were incessant rains that caused heavy landslides, and there was no effective means for combating the spread of yellow fever and malaria when the French were trying to build their canal. Also, they were trying to build a sea level canal, which is important because everybody, even America, I think, tried. They were just like, you just can't do it. The way the dirt is laid out, and I watched videos on this. I'm gonna mess it up, but it's like basically like the jungle is what was keeping the dirt there. So when they started to take trees out and stuff like that to try to make way for it, they had these huge landslides. So it wasn't always just even the rain; it was the fact of like the way the terrain was made. You know what I mean? It was just almost going to be impossible to actually do a Suez like type canal. And I just had to stop for a second to Google and make sure the Suez Canal is in fact a sea level canal, because I didn't want to go on for the rest of this episode. It just sounded really dumb. But back to the French and their ill-fated effort to try to build a sea level canal in Panama. So they lost 22,000 people in their effort to try to build that, and that was in a mixture of people dying to landslides and as well as just the malaria and the yellow fever. And we talk more about malaria later. But the 22,000 is a lot. For the record, I think the U.S. when they made theirs, they still ended up losing like 6,000 people. God rest their souls. And it's necessary to mention that malaria and its impact on these endeavors, because if it weren't for the discovery of mosquitoes, the mosquitoes' role in malaria, then there may not even be a Panama Canal today. That is actually, as I've done the reading, that is pretty accurate. So the term malaria comes from the ancient Greeks, I do believe, and they initially thought that malaria came from drinking swamp water, and then their ideas shifted to that it came from air, and so you get mal, meaning bad, and area, meaning air, bad air, and so that's how we get the term malaria. So what we have to do is figure out who is the guy, who is the fine gentleman who figured out that mosquitoes actually carry it. And so cue Sir Ronald Ross in 1892. This guy became interested in malaria, which is just an odd interest to have. Like, I guess back then they didn't have like phones or anything besides diseases, I guess, to get involved with. But so and he originally doubted the parasite's existence, so he sounds like a QAnon guy, and he became an enthusiastic convert to the belief that malaria parasites were in the bloodstream when this was demonstrated to him by a man named Patrick Manson during a period of home leave in 1894. And this guy, Patrick Manson, we're not going to go into it at all, but he's known as the father of tropical diseases, which is, that's what we all want to grow up to be. And on his return to India, we're back to Mr. Sir Ronald Ross now. And on his return to India in 1895, Ross began his quest to prove the hypothesis of a man named Alphonse Leveran, love you man, and Manson, that mosquitoes were connected with the propagation of malaria, and regularly corresponded with Manson on his findings, sending back letters back home. This is what I'm doing, man. What are you doing? I'm finding the malaria, maybe not. And so enter America into this whole thing. So Sir Ronald Ross is the guy who actually, like I said, kind of puts a saddle on this whole disease thing when they're trying to build the Panama Canal. So if it weren't for him, we probably wouldn't have gotten there. Or I mean, somebody would have figured it out eventually, but it was really him that was able to kind of mitigate that for America, so that we could go on and make this canal. So enter America, yeah. The actual Panama Canal was developed following the failure of a French construction team in the 1880s, as we mentioned. And the United States commenced building a canal across the 50-mile stretch of the narrow Panama Isthmus. We defined isthmus in 1904. So following the deliberations of the U.S. Isthmian Canal Commission and a push from old Theo Roosevelt, the United States purchased the French assets in the canal zone. So that's a big part of it, actually. And that's why there's even some people who were involved with the Panama Canal, even when they really probably didn't even want to. That's a whole different story. This thing, there should be, and I kid you not, I don't say this about everything, there should be some sort of like Showtime, like HBO show about the creation of the Panama Canal, and like really tell it, because it's wild. But like, so the assets, because the French already spent so much money in it, and they're already so like kind of deep into it, that the only way you could take over their operation would be to buy from them what they'd already done, the work they'd already done. So that was just kind of to explain that. So the America bought that from France for $40 million in 1902, and when a proposed treaty over rights to build in what was then the Colombian territory of Panama, it was rejected. The U.S. military threw its weight behind a Panamanian independence movement, eventually negotiating a deal with the new government. Now, this is worth stopping and digging deeper and digging into, because when I read this, I was just like, here we go again, just being America, and you don't want it to be, but it is. Just like your old racist grandparents who are like, don't be, but they're like, yep, we are. So because I did not know much about that part of the world, I'd like to stop and take a moment to just give you a little bit of history of Panama. So first off, it's what's known as a transcontinental country. Did not know that word. I knew the word existed, but I didn't know it existed in terms of like calling a country such a thing, because they're called this because it's a country that is technically on two different continents, and it's at the bottom of North America and at the top of South America. And it was originally inhabited by indigenous people before the Spanish showed up. They broke away from Spain in 1821. They eventually fall in with these dudes named Nueva Granada and create the Republic of Colombia around 1831, so like 10 years later. And here's where it gets tricky. So they stay a part of Colombia until 1903, when America's trying to get the canal built. It's at that point that Colombia is not feeling too hot about the idea of America taking over, the canal construction. And that's when the U.S., as I said earlier, backs the Panamanian independence, and then they sign a treaty with that new government that grants America exclusive and permanent possession of the Panama Canal Zone. What's very interesting about that was that there was no Spanish translation of the treaty. It was only in English. And it's just like, come on, America. Can we not be America for just like 5 seconds? The U.S. Senate ratified this treaty. Of course they did. But the Colombian Senate, fearing loss of sovereignty, which that's a very healthy fear, they refused. And in response, President Roosevelt gave tacit approval to a rebellion. He gave tacit approval to a rebellion by Panamanian nationalists. So he was just like, "You guys go in there and get them," which began on November 3rd, 1903. And to aid these guys, he basically cut off railroad service, like hit their side of the railroad service, which coincidentally was the railroads that the Colombians were going to use to then bring troops in to fight. So they were like, "Oh, got you there." And then also, I believe, what is it? The U.S. warship Nashville just pulls up on the coast, which is like Theo Roosevelt's idea of just putting a gun on the table and just being like, "Yeah, what you want to do, bro?" Like, imagine that. I mean, in any conversation, we're just talking. I just put a gun on the table. Like, it changes things. So in exchange for signing the treaty, Panama received $10 million and an annuity of $250,000 beginning 9 years later. As stated, there was never a treaty printed in their native language, so yeah. So we're going to jump to building the canal. Build that canal. The majority of the workers on the canal were of Caribbean descent, and that's just worth noting because sometimes I feel like it gets lost in some of these articles and podcasts that I listen to. But there's a great podcast that I listen to called Working History, which really delves into the lives of the men who worked on the actual canal. And it's about the woman. The person they interview is a woman who's working on a book called that she's naming Box 25, and it's because the Box 25 is the number of the box where these stories are stored, and I believe it's the the House of Congress. What's that? The Congressional Library, I believe, is there's Box 25 in there. So that's where all the people's stories of the men, and it's just there's one woman who's in there recorded. In their story. So she writes about that, and it's very interesting. I'm not even going to really go any more into that because I would butcher it. And then when I listened to it, I was like, this is actually pretty good. So I'll definitely direct you there if you want to know any more about the people. But so I never had any idea about how the Panama Canal worked at all. But after reading some stuff and watching a couple of videos, I think I have a decent handle on it. And so they built the canal over some mountains. Then they dug down in those mountains just a little bit and created a path for water to travel. Then they flooded that pathway from a river close by, and the ships flow through that, elevating through these locks that get flooded and raised, and they raise the ship to the next level until it gets across the mountain. And so I had no idea that's how it worked at all. Like I said before that, I thought it was just they dug a creek and they put some water in there. This is really like an elaborate system of locks and water flows. And I heard on another podcast that they were talking about. They said that it's something. It's an insane amount of gallons of fresh water that takes like every like ship to get through there, and they lose like half of it every time. But that's a whole different conversation. But so if what I just said to you makes no sense, there are plenty of videos out there that will fully explain it. And so what comes next? We'll get back to the actual construction of the canal. What comes next is a series of men that are put in the position of chief engineer. And they tried to get the canal built, but run into the same problems that the French did. They eventually, Teddy Roosevelt, he puts Lieutenant Colonel George Washington Goethals in charge, and they say he did this because he was all the other guys had quit, and he was a guy that couldn't quit. He worked for the army. It's like, well, you're under a contract, bro. So he did that, and Goethals finally he writes the ship, and one of the first things he did was really decide on doing the lock canal as opposed to the sea canal. And this guy, he did some slick stuff as well. When they were running behind on their deadline to try to actually get it done in the later years, he used mental warfare to con his workers into working harder. And so he basically separated them by military and civilian and told the other side that they were better than the other. And it worked, because the canal was built on time. And Woodrow Wilson actually pressed the button for the bomb that blew the little piece of the mountainside in 1914 that created the water flow. And I looked more into this because I just thought that just sounds a little too futuristic for 108 years ago. And it turns out I'm kind of right. So it turns out like he either pressed the button like that off of, they either pressed the button off of receiving a telegram from him, or his telegram machine was connected to the dynamite, which I don't know about the latter this time, But if you haven't, you should check out some pictures or videos of the creation of the canal. It is huge. I didn't know it was that. I didn't know it was as big as it was. It is ginormous. Is a pretty decent word to apply to it. In 1914, the SS Ancon, ANCON, becomes the first ship to pass through the Panama Canal, and the ship was renamed for the purpose of the canal, which not a lot of things I saw said that, but yeah, I forget what it was. It had like an Indian name, I think, before that, the Swashtu, something like that. But yeah, they renamed it that because I don't remember the actual reason, but like as far as like what that word means, but it was because those ships, that ship ended up being a ship that its main job was to carry things back and forth across the Panama Canal. It really didn't go off, to other parts of the world too often. All right, and so there's one more thing I want to talk about before we head on to the next topic, and it is about the types of ships that that go through the Panama Canal. And a lot of different ships can, but they make these specific types of ships that are the exact like specifications of the Panama Canal, and they're called Panamax ships. And it sounds like it would be awesome, and I guess it is. They make these things, but these ships are literally, like I said, the same exact like dimensions of like the locks before they get to like there's like a lake up there. I forgot, I didn't really mention, called Gatun Lake, which is the main part after you float through the locks and you get to a kind of, I guess, a plateau, and then that's like the lake, and you float there for like 20 something miles, and you go back down through similar locks on the other side, and you get back out. That's how it really kind of works. But these Panamax ships are evidently designed to be like the exact size of the dimensions of the locks, I guess, is pretty much what I got, because they say it's really difficult to actually maneuver these ships because you don't have much leeway. These ships are, like I said, they're almost a spitting image of the actual path they're trying to traverse. And that is how the Panama Canal happened. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're gonna round it up. The idea of creating the Panama Canal dates back to the 1500s. The French are the first to try to create a canal in Panama. The first ship passes through in 1914, and Panama would regain control of the canal in 1999. Things I didn't know before, and now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? All right, so the things I didn't know before. Let's see. So it took 9 years and 24,000 workers to create the pathway for the canal alone. So it took almost a decade for just them to create like the place where like the water could go. I just thought that was pretty wild. When it's something that I don't even think about. You always think about like the total, how many people worked on it or whatever, but it's like it took almost 10 years for them just to carve out the path. And so the next one, let's see, it takes about 8 to 10 hours on average for a ship to travel through the Panama Canal. I know I saw some higher estimates, and depending on the type of ship and stuff like that, it can take longer. But I thought that what I saw was this was about the average. And this next one was kind of what I was talking to you about earlier. It's about the amount of fresh water that it takes for a ship to get through. It's 52 million gallons of fresh water to move a ship from one side of the canal to the other. That's wild. And then, like I said, the podcast that I was listening to said about half of it gets absorbed back into the system, back into the lake, and then the other half just gets lost into the actual, like, their respective oceans, either the Atlantic or the Pacific. And the sad part about that is that Gatun Lake is evidently the source of fresh water for that main region of Panama, and so it's like they're just losing water every day, every transfer. And the last one, let's see, the last one here. There's a toll to cross the canal, which I assumed, I guess I never really thought about. The largest one ever on record is $150,000, but that's not that important to me. The cheapest one is that when there was a man who swam across it in the early 20s by a man by the name of Richard Halliburton, I believe his name was, and they charged him 36 cents. So his body was worth 36 cents at that time. And that's just a little interesting fact that I did not know at all. All right, that's been another episode of HDTH. I want to thank you guys for always coming back and press and play with me week to week here. Trying to grow, trying to just keep putting out episodes and seeing where it goes. like and subscribe, like I said, wherever you consume your podcasts. I realize there's so many other different places besides where I actually consume them, places like Podbean or Good Pod or all those different places. So if you're on there, give me a like and a subscribe and a comment, and I'll see you guys next week.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Wells Fargo presents one of the surest ways to grow your money. A Wells Fargo CD account, where you can earn a 5.00% annual percentage yield on an 11-month term with a minimum opening deposit of $5,000. Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/CD rates to open a CD account and start growing your savings with us.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.